I'm David Zucchino. I'm a foreign correspondent and author based in Durham, North Carolina. The first book I wrote back in the 1990s was called Myth of the Welfare Queen, and this came about because I was covering the drug trade in North Philadelphia, which is probably the poorest part of Philadelphia with the highest crime rate, and came across many families who were dependent on so-called welfare, aid to families with dependent children. And the narrative at that time in America was that anybody who was on welfare or was lazy and didn't want to work and deliberately had a lot of children in order to get more welfare benefits. Ronald Reagan, when he was president, had not coined the term, but used the term welfare queen to disparage people who supposedly live like kings and queens with Cadillacs and eating steaks, all from the proceeds of their welfare checks. And I just thought that was a completely racist and unfair depiction of who was actually on welfare. And as it turned out, I found out immediately that far more white people were on welfare at that time than black people, and that it was impossible to live in luxury on the small amount of money that came in from welfare. So I decided to actually drill down and go into the lives of people who were receiving welfare benefits. And I settled on a woman named Odessa Williams, who was a great-grandmother, and basically took care of her children, the children's children, and their children in this extended family from a little row house in North Philadelphia. She did receive tiny welfare payments based on the children, the great-grandchildren and grandchildren that she was raising, but it obviously was not enough to live on, so she went out and trash picked. She basically outfitted her house with refrigerators and microwaves and TVs and rugs and sofas, going through trash in northeastern Philadelphia on trash day, going out to the streets and just grabbing stuff that people were throwing out. She also collected bottles and turned them in for deposit. So she basically had a full-time job of coming up with this money and raising the family. So it wasn't that she wasn't working, she just didn't have a traditional, typical job. And a lot of her time was spent navigating the welfare system, seeking health care for herself and for her kids. She had a lot of medical problems. Her kids were constantly sick. It was a terrible environment. So she was busy 24 hours a day and barely slept. And I wanted just to have this come across, that people on welfare aren't sitting back and just letting the money roll in. I'm sure there are some people who manage to do that, but I certainly didn't run across them. So I think this book, if people read it, they might get a better understanding of how, first of all, people on welfare don't want to be on welfare and don't seek it out, but circumstances require that they do accept money, and there were a lot of conditions on that money, which I don't have time to get into, but their lives are incredibly busy, incredibly demanding with just basic survival.